Hey everybody, Matt Lawton here on the Astrological Winds channel, and doing a little bit something different here. That's not my face in the video. What that is the Aries equinox chart set for Washington, D.C. And in mundane astrology, which is the astrology of the politics in the world, events in the world, history, so to speak, we can look at the quarterly charts whenever we hit a solstice or an equinox, set it for the exact time of the event, in this case the equinox, and set it for the capital of a country, and in this case Washington, D.C., and you can get an idea of the political climate and the things that are going to go on in that country on an energetic level for the next 3 months or so. And I've been using this method of looking at the United States and what's going to happen in the next quarter for years successfully, to give me an idea on what the pulse, so to speak, of the nation is going to be like. So this is basically a quarterly weather report, astrologically, for the United States for the spring of 2020. Now, when I looked at the winter solstice chart back in December, the thing that really struck me about that chart and that I remember really well was that the people of the United States were being deceived on many levels. Like, there's a lot of deception going on from our leadership. Now, in astrology, just like being a lawyer or a doctor, some other kind of consultant, you have to remain as objective as possible and as detached as possible, because the energy is not just following what your personal belief system is, and is not just going to manifest as the way you would see it or like to see it, but it's going to manifest in a lot of different ways based on the different choices that people have. And one of my favorite examples to use in this is back in 2008, we had a lot of energy that spoke about revolution, about like major revolution would be a good way to say it. And that was the time when the Occupy movement started up. But it was also the same time that the Tea Party movement started up. So you had two completely conflicting viewpoints, but within the same energy signature. They were both a revolution for the people that were behind those movements. So when you're doing mundane astrology, you really need to try to maintain a level of detachment and objectivity. But that being said, like I talked about in my weekly forecast this week, actually, about how transits and aspects, the timing transits and aspects, continue to tell a story of what's going on in our lives, or in this case, in the life of a country, when you're talking about mundane astrology. So one of the things that you can say is, okay, when you're doing mundane astrology, it's not just looking at, a chart or different charts, and there's all kinds of different methods of looking at mundane astrology, but it's also knowing what is going on in the country right now, in this case the United States, politically and socially, and you can tie that in to the energy of a chart like this and get an idea of where that energy is going to go in the near future. So that's basically what I'm doing here. I've done this for many, many years, each quarter, and it always gives me a really good read on what's happening with the United States. So right now, obviously, we are in like one of the biggest crises of all of our lifetimes. This is like equivalent to like our parents or grandparents going through a world war, things like that. And we have this like coronavirus spreading around the globe. And it's interesting to note that there's some stories coming out in the last few days about how certain political people seem to have known ahead of time that it could get out of hand, and they did not let the public know. So we can go right back to that last solstice chart where I saw that, you know, there might be a lot of deception going on in the country from our leaders not telling people the truth of what was really going on. So let's look at this chart really quick. And, you know, this is going to be a little bit fun and different because I've actually got the chart here for you. And some people have encouraged me not to just show my face and talk to the camera, but actually, you know, try to get a little bit interactive with charts and things like that. So you're not seeing my face today. You may see my finger here and there. But we're going to keep this focused on this chart. And if you know some astrology, you know, this will maybe help you learn a little bit more about how to work mundane astrology. And otherwise, if you don't, listen to in between the terms for what I feel like the political energy is going to be for the next 3 months. So what we've got going on here is you can see the sun is at 0 degrees Aries. So that's exactly when the sun went into the vernal equinox in spring in Washington, D.C. And very interesting right away. Here's our rising sign, our ascendant right here, the eastern horizon, and it's Scorpio. So Scorpio, of course, has a lot to do with, you know, really intense stuff coming up to the surface. Things that have to do with birth, death, rebirth, complete transformation, you know, things like that. Very intense stuff to deal with. Very deep, intense, emotional stuff that has to be dealt with now that it's come to the surface. It can't be denied or pushed under the surface anymore. So the ascendant and the first house in a mundane chart rules how the nation feels in general, like just the general feeling of how the nation feels. So we're dealing with this really intense energy that's come up, and it, you know, and it is having a lot to do with death and changing, transforming everything. So the ruler of this chart, therefore, is what the ruler of Scorpio is, and that's Mars, which is right down here in the second house, and it's in Capricorn, where Mars is really strong. Mars is exalted in Capricorn, but it's the energy of the conqueror. And so, you know, Mars is the lesser malefic in astrology, which means that, you know, especially in mundane astrology and things like that, where it can bring in what humans consider negative or bad or malefic things that are difficult to deal with. And it's interesting, it's in the second house, because the second house is the house in mundane astrology of money, assets, and resources of the nation. And so right now, that is the main area that this virus is directly affecting, is the assets, money, and resources of the country are in a free fall. The whole economy is collapsing because everyone is being told to stay home because of this intense virus that's come up. So you see right away some really intense energy going on in the second house and with Mars. And check it out. Today is also the exact conjunction of Mars conjunct Jupiter. Now, normally Mars conjunct Jupiter gives a lot of energy. It gives like exuberant, enthusiastic, confident, courageous energy, but the thing is, first of all, it's a conjunction. And a conjunction is an aspect that can go either way in the sense of whether that's experienced in a positive or negative sense. So like when you add Jupiter to something, you're expanding whatever it is. Okay? You're expanding whatever it is, growth. Okay? So with Mars being a malefic planet, if it's showing malefic tendencies, then adding Jupiter to it is like throwing lighter fluid on a fire. Things can blow up and get really out of control really fast. So this can show that the acceleration of the downturn in the economy can spread like wildfire, and that's what we're already seeing. And that's what we can expect to see this quarter. So here's the other thing too. Jupiter, and I talked about this several times this year already, is in Capricorn this year. It is in one of the weakest signs it can be in. So it's having a hard time doing what it likes to do with expansion and growth, and that is giving positive, beneficial stuff. Instead, it's fallen into the restriction of Capricorn energy. And so if anything, Jupiter, follow me on this, is expanding restrictions in resources. And just like I said at the beginning of the year, I know the stock market was doing really well then, but Jupiter can really give us an idea of what's going on in the economy for a year. Going into Capricorn, after it was in Sagittarius, where it was in rulership, and the markets did great last year, going into Capricorn, where it's in fall, I said most likely the markets were not going to be doing well this year, that there would be some kind of contraction. Well, there's a runaway contraction now with Mars, Jupiter. And we're going to continue a little bit more, and we've talked about this a lot too, this whole lineup of planets, Mars, Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn, all within 7 degrees of one another in Capricorn. And so we've been talking about how this energy has been a big focus all this year. The Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn in January at the same time that Jupiter went into Capricorn. And so we also have Mars and Pluto conjunct very tight in the second house. And I'll tell you something right there, and you can add Saturn there too. This is all about our energy being restricted and having to be dictated to as to what we can and can't do. Pluto is all about power, and so the powers that be are basically telling us we have to stay home. The economy is going to have to crash. There's going to be a lot of death and illness, overloaded institutions, things like that. And then Mars-Saturn is complete restriction. This is basically us being all stuck at home. So you can see with what we know what's going on with the coronavirus right now, and this stellium in Capricorn, and Mars ruling the chart, that the second house the house of resources, money, assets, and even the way we feel about ourselves as a nation, our values of how we feel, we're feeling like they've all failed and let us down. And it's interesting too, the South Node, and we've talked about this, I even talked about this earlier with Chiron earlier this week. Chiron squaring the South Node is in Capricorn. Our old structures are failing. The things that used to work are failing, and here it is, right in the second house. It is manifesting in the failure of our money and resource system to deal with a real world problem that's that's nature. It's an organism. It's an illness. It's a virus. It's a living organism that's taking down this house of assets in the U.S. chart. So one of the other really interesting things too, and I mean this, this kind of stuff is just mind-boggling at times. So Eris, which I don't have in the chart, is in Aries, and Eris is in Aries in the 5th house right here, and it's exactly square Mars too. And Eris is the goddess of chaos. So what do we have? Complete chaos in the 5th house. What's the 5th house rule in mundane astrology? Our worlds of entertainment, sports, and things we do with our kids. Eris, the goddess of chaos, has completely shut down those industries, the things that Americans live for on an everyday basis. Their sports, their entertainment, their kids. They're doing activities with their kids. And look who rules the 5th house too. Mars. Aries on the 5th house cusp. So Mars is not only ruling the chart and the feeling of the nation and all that energy tied up with Mars, but it's also ruling the 5th house. So the two biggest things that the virus is affecting, the assets and money of the nation, and the sports, entertainment, and our children even being able to go to school, is what Mars is ruling, the ruler of the chart. It's amazing how astrology works, isn't it? Just absolutely amazing. So, and what's interesting too, we want to go back a little bit. Jupiter, which I said is in fall, so traditionally very weak. And when you're doing political and mundane charts, you must know the conditions of the planets and what makes them strong and weak. It is a traditional astrology thing that you must know. It has nothing to do with psychological astrology. Okay? Sagittarius rules the 2nd house, or is on the 2nd house cusp, and Jupiter is the ruler of Sag, and Jupiter is super weak. So once again, this shows that resources, money, assets are going to be under a lot of stress in this nation for the next 3 months at least. All right, now, a couple other things I'd like to talk about with this. Now, the sun, the president or the leader of our country is the president of the United States, and he is represented in on the mundane world by the sun and by the 10th house. So, really interesting. The sun is conjunct Chiron. This is the wounded leader. The wounded leader, 4th house, that is the land and the people. The people perceive the leader as wounded. And 10th house, Virgo, ruled by Mercury in Pisces, the liar. Told you about Mercury in Pisces many times in the last few weeks because of Mercury retrograding through Pisces. Mercury is the weakest place in the chart it can be is in Pisces. This is the deceiver, the trickster, the liar, the guy who's got the extra card up his sleeves, the guy who's deceiving, the guy who's deluding others. So, our president continues to not be able to tell us the truth. Every day he lies to us. It's documented in the press. And even the people who support him know he lies, and they, just feel it's part of his makeup. But basically, this is indicating we're still not getting the truth from our president. And at this point, with the sun in the fourth, conjunct Chiron, the people see him as a wounded leader. They don't have faith in him. They don't trust him. It's just not a good situation, and that's how that will continue to be so here. The sun is not ruling any houses in this chart. Leo's intercepted in the ninth, so that even shows once again the weakness of this president right now, and the perception of him being weak. And notice too, Neptune is also in the fourth house, and that's like, the people in the nation and the nation itself, the land, feeling lost, feeling disillusioned, discouraged. And that could even represent an illness spreading across the land. So that would be our virus there too. Now, the moon is one of the good things in this chart. This is one of the things I like in this chart, because I know it's been a lot of really heavy stuff so far. So the moon's in Aquarius, and it's down in the third house. And the third house, rules the communications and travel in local areas, your local neighborhoods, your local politicians, things like that. And so it's in Aquarius, and I like that because, even though the moon can be emotionally distant in Aquarius, it does care for everybody equally. So on a local level, people are going to respond to this well. Neighbors are going to help each other out, families are going to help each other out, local politicians are going to help each other out, are going to help their communities out. But this can also indicate some of the restricted travel, especially with the Mercury in Pisces in the third house too. This is the restricted travel because of illness. But what's interesting, going back to the moon too, it's conjunct Ceres, the nurturer. So where are we going to get our nurturing from? Each other, our neighbors, the people around us, local communities. This is one of the most positive things in this chart, is that local communities are going to take on the role of nurturing. And that's us. That's the people that make up those communities. But like I said, once again, we are going to be restricted in our travels there. So interesting stuff going on in the third house too. So we've talked about the first house, the second house, the third house, the fourth house, and the fifth house. And, we've talked about the sun, the moon, Mercury, Mars, Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto, even Neptune. And there's two other guys we haven't talked about, and they're both in the sixth house. Notice all the planets are below the horizon in this chart. So our world has sunk into the darkness, into the underworld. The United States is in a journey into the underworld right now. No planets above the horizon. This is Juno the asteroid. This is Vesta the asteroid. And that's the north node of the moon. So really no true planets above the horizon. So we are truly journeying through the underworld right now. So the last two planets are Venus and Uranus. So Venus is all about our relationships. The sixth house is all about our work, our routine, and the police and the military also. And so, very interesting. Let's just go to Uranus first. Uranus in the sixth house. So what does Uranus do? It upsets things suddenly. Events occur that upset things suddenly. Our routine, our health system, our military and police have all just been upset suddenly. We can't go to work anymore, so our routines have radically changed. Hospitals and service for health, which is ruled by sixth also, are under incredible stress because of the rapidly changing situation with the virus. And the military and police now have completely different duties. The military is being called out to distribute food and things like that. So here's how you see Uranus really, and it's interesting too. This is one of the cool things about this. I mentioned this earlier too. Uranus is sextile the North Node. So this ties back into that third house stuff actually, because this is people making new connections with people they normally would not make connections with. New communities forming, new associations forming, and North Node in the eighth house because of shared resources. We have to learn to share resources in order for everyone to get by. So this is a really interesting position for Uranus to be in, this tight sextile to the North Node. And then we go to Venus. Venus is actually the strongest planet in the chart. We have the Sun's exalted and Mars is exalted too. And Saturn's actually really strong too in rulership down there in Capricorn. But here, and even Neptune and Pisces is strong, but Venus and Taurus is in rulership in the sixth house. And it's so funny to me how this is manifesting, because Venus in Taurus wants to enjoy life. It wants to slow down. It wants to take some deep breaths. It wants to enjoy what's going on around it. And now all of a sudden, instead of going to work every day, people get to sit back and be passive and enjoy the simpler things in life. Maybe all the complex entertainment and sports and all that have been taken away, but this Venus is actually going to improve relationships. That's what Venus is all about, in a daily basis, on a regular basis. Very strong in Taurus. So very interesting energy going on in this chart. And I think, like, what's cool about this Venus too is I think that people, the relationship with the military and the police may actually be really positive during this whole thing. So very, very interesting energy going on. And you can even say there's a trine between Venus and Mars and Jupiter. So you can say, Venus, the people helping each other, are what's going to alleviate some of the issues in the second house. So we've gone through all the planets, and we've gone through the first six houses. But these other six houses also rule certain parts of the country. We did go through the 10th house too. We talked about how the president is in the 10th house. So the 7th house is the house of our allies. And look, it's ruled by Venus. So Taurus on that cusp means Venus rules it. So it looks like this is going to be a really good quarter for us with our allies. Like, we may actually pull back together with our allies, and maybe that'll have a lot to do with having to fight this battle of the coronavirus and how it's affecting economy. Like, there's some good things here. The 8th house we did touch on briefly, just that the fact that the North Node is there. Now, the North Node is where we need to be going towards, and it's really interesting that in Cancer it's saying, hey, everybody needs to be taken care of and nurtured. And in the 8th house,
with the resources that we all share. So that's really interesting there, too. It's once again tying into a lot of this Venus energy of people taking care of one another and the moon Ceres signature that this with the sextile to Uranus is we have three signatures that people are going to rally and help one another out, that we the people themselves may do a better job than the government is what it comes down to, is what this chart is saying. Because when you look at this, remember I was saying this deceptive Mercury was ruling the 10th house of the executive, the president, and therefore he's probably not telling us the truth. Well, Gemini is also, Mercury also rules Gemini. So the 8th house, which is the house of banking, international finance, and corporations, are being ruled by this weak Mercury. So who is deceiving the United States people and public still? The executive, the chief executive, and the corporations and banks and international financiers. These guys are not telling us the truth about what's going on, and probably not only in relation to the virus, but the economy and many other things. So, not to be trusted. Executives, corporations, banks, financiers, not telling us the truth. 9th house is ruled by the moon. Cancer up here. The moon rules Cancer. Once again, I think, with the 9th house is, is basically, our law, our health system, our higher educational system. So all those things are going to be in a supportive role and try to help people in this situation. The laws, many of the laws being suspended, the medical community trying to rally together to help. So there's a lot of strength there. Talked about the 10th house. The 11th house is Congress. And Congress also pushing where the country wants to go. Ruled by Venus in the 6th. So Congress is going to be working hard and hopefully doing the job they're supposed to do by creating a check and balance here with an executive who's not handling the situation well. It looks like Congress may do a better job of handling the situation than the executive will. Then the last thing we got is the 12th house here, and that's also being ruled by Scorpio, which once again goes back to Mars, the ruler of our chart, and that's all our big institutions like our hospitals and prisons. So once again, you can see the stress of this situation is hitting, assets and money, entertainment, sports, and children's activities, but it's also going to be a huge stress on public institutions. This is government institutions, hospitals, things like that. All of them are going to be under an incredible amount of stress. All right, so we can see this is a great chart. Now that we already know the event that's occurring, that's going to dictate a lot of what happens in the United States in the next 3 months, and you can see how well this chart is already explaining the situation. So resources, entertainment, institutions will definitely be under stress. We have a lying executive or deceptive executive branch, deceptive financial industry. We're going to get a lot of help from the military and police and Congress, and the most help are going to be local people helping one another out in really new and positive ways. Their routines have changed, new connections, taking care of one another. All right, so got a pretty good astrological lesson here if you're someone who knows some astrology. And if you're not, I think you should have a good idea of where we're going to go. We're all in this together. There's, don't look at this thing as just being a negative thing and get lost in the fear, because there will probably be a lot of benefits out of this too. A lot of changes in society that maybe are a long time coming are going to be forced to come. And of course, there's always the danger, especially with Mars and Capricorn, of, you know, the conquering energy, someone trying to take complete control of a situation, like kind of like kingly or fascist type of way. So we could get definitely a lot of dictating orders from the government because of that, telling us what our behavior should be. And they may try to enforce it at some point, but I see most of the military and police are going to be more apt to be on the side of understanding where the people are at, and local politicians too. So, and even Congress, I think, looks like they're going to try to keep like these guys a little bit in control. But of course, those that are in power, they're in power for a reason, and they got themselves there, and it's hard to chip them away. And when Mars is in Capricorn, they have a lot of strength, those who are in power. When Saturn's in Capricorn, those in power have a lot of strength still. So anyway, Matt Lawton here, Astrological Winds channel, and this is our quarterly forecast for the United States. And need any help with any astrological problems, readings, consultations, I'm available. My email is matthue823@gmail.com. So that's MATTHUE823@gmail.com. Thanks so much, and I will see you soon, early next week, for our forecast next week. And don't forget that Saturn going into Aquarius really soon, that'll be a chance to change systems here. And, very, very interesting. And, we just had Vesta also go into Gemini today, too, which means information sharing is great, but only to a point if it disconnects you from your emotions. And when it goes into Gemini, that's what can happen. All right, let me get off now, and hang in there, be well, stay healthy, make the right choices to keep your health strong.